Okay, welcome everybody to the North Atlantic Fire Science Exchange's Spring 2026 Student Webinar Series. My name is Eric Evanson and I'm NAFC's Science Communications Specialist. Now, the goal of this series is to connect students with the fire and forestry community to establish positive working relationships as well as exchanging knowledge. And speaking of exchanging knowledge, just want to remind you that NAFC is part of the Joint Fire Science Program's Fire Science Exchange Network. There's 15 exchanges in all across the United States. You can see them there on the map. And if you do want to learn anything about any of the exchanges or the Joint Fire Science Program itself, we encourage you to go to firescience.gov. Now, very excited today as we kick off our Spring 2026 Student Webinar Series. Our speaker today is Anna Welch from SUNY ESF, and she's going to be talking about digging deeper, the mutual exchange of operational and academic intelligence. Now, the way it's going to work today is we're going to go ahead and have Anna give her presentation first, and then we're going to have a follow-up with a question and answer session. Now, if any point during Anna's talk you have a question, feel free to pop that into the chat. And again, we'll kind of come back to that at the end of the session. And then we're going to close the hour with just a little reminder about our two upcoming talks that we have in the series, as well as ways to get involved. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and turn it over to Anna, and you can go ahead with your presentation.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Let's see if I can get this. Do. Alrighty, how does that look?
Perfect. Yep.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks everyone for attending. Just full disclosure, this is my first webinar, so please bear with me, but I'm stoked that Eric asked me to participate. I think this is a topic that I'm happy to share about, and I'm very passionate, and hopefully it gives everyone something to take away. And yeah, I'll do my best to not use too much firefighter jargon, so if I slip up, please call me on that at the end, and I'll definitely clarify. Yeah, so the mutual exchange of operational and academic intelligence. Um, Basically, I'm just going to be talking about my experience operationally and additionally my experience scholarly as a graduate assistant with the overarching theme that those two forms of knowledge and intelligence don't necessarily have to be disparate. And then just before I get started, a little disclaimer. I am not presuming that any of this is from like a government agency. And what I'm going to talk about is only in my experience. And these photos that I'm using are all taken by me or friends. So just please do not share them. All right. So, who am I? Why should you listen to me? Well, so I am a wildland firefighter. I have been working as one since 2021. So I'll now be entering my sixth season. I started on a Type 3 engine in North Ops in Region 5, which is California, if you're going by the Forest Service regions. And then after that first year of fire experience, I went over to a hotshot crew, and that's where I've been for the last 4 years. And that was also located in North Ops. And then upcoming next year, I'll be going over to a helitack crew, which is helicopter operations, but you still act as a wildland firefighting crew and module. And then aside from that, my alter ego is a graduate assistant at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. So that is what SUNY ESF stands for. And I'm a member of the Applied Forest and Fire Ecology Lab. I was really grateful to get a position where I can be pursuing school in my off season, and then remain as a permanent seasonal employee by taking semesters off so that I can still meet my 6 month minimum commitment, which I take very seriously because I think that without these kind of two parts of my experience, I think that's what really strengthens each other, I guess. Um, yeah, and then what brought me there, right? I got my undergrad at the University of Connecticut. I got a bachelor's of science in natural resources, and I concentrated in sustainable forestry. While I was at UConn, I was on the forestry crew, which is what those pictures on the left are from. And that was definitely a foundational experience for me. It was the first time I got to use a chainsaw. And it was the first time I got to work out in the field in kind of a collaborative environment and see some of the things I was learning in class, actually be enacted on the landscape, which was definitely a huge influence in my future direction. And then prior to firefighting in that kind of middle time, I worked at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station, doing a lot of vegetation surveys, long-term ecological monitoring. And I also did some data analysis and synthesis of Yale forestry data at the McLean Game Refuge. And then adventures in the outdoors. And that's kind of those, I guess, three different experiences of mine professionally, academically, and then in my free time are what kind of all combined to make me interested in going out west and fighting fire, and just seeing what was out there, you know. So my first fire season was 2021, which was a pretty gnarly one. That was when the Dixie Fire happened. I packed up all of my stuff and I drove cross country in a pretty classic and cliche way that a bunch of people who get into fire do. I think that my gas mileage was severely hurt by those things on top of my car, and it definitely made me stick out like a sore thumb, but wouldn't have had it any other way. It was a really great experience, even just to be able to see the landscape of the United States. And then here's me. This is on the first ever fire that I won on. It happened to be a 24-hour shift, and I was so hooked after that. I was like, yep, this is what I'm doing, and this is where I want to be. Um, and then here's just a quick video of the Dixie Fire. So this was the day that it hopped Highway 70. And being able to be exposed to kind of this level of fire activity in my first year was really pretty incredible. And I think it's what solidified firefighting as something that I was going to continue doing. And so there's that. Yeah, and so being that close to the flaming front and seeing the way that the smoke plume is acting on the landscape was definitely pretty incredible, and I knew I wanted to understand a little bit more about that. So then comes the going over to a hotshot crew. Um, I knew that I wanted to be on a module that was a little bit more regimented, that had high standards, and where I was going to be able to see basically as much fire as possible. And hotshot crew felt like that was where it was. So just a little bit of a background so that everyone's on the same page. Interagency Hotshot Crews, they were developed in the 1940s in Southern California. They're what's called an initial attack resource. So that means that they're fully credentialed to be the first on scene of an emerging wildfire. Um, they are typically brought into the areas that are, the gnarliest or the hottest or anything like that. And that's mostly for the fact that they are considered a type 1 crew, which means that they have to hold certain qualifications in the leadership and in the overhead to make sure that they can do these kind of more risky operations in a safe way, and that their training is up to snuff to be able to operate in those environments. Hotshot crews are not just Forest Service. There are BLM, BIA, and state certified hotshot crews. So that's where you get the interagency element. And they are a national resource. So even though we have what's called our home unit, during the 6 month period of fire season, we are beholden to the GAC, which is the Geographic Area Coordinating Center. So they can send us anywhere across the United States that there is a fire or a need. And they'll even send us to Canada or internationally if that's something that becomes necessary with mutual aid. Um, and yeah, like I was speaking about with the typing, it's really about holding kind of enough credentials that you can break down into different groups and you still have the knowledge that can support you doing operations effectively. Um, yeah, and additionally, just like some other little facts that I think help. Um, we do mobilize within 2 hours of an assignment. So that's a big thing. And we're supposed to be fully self-sustained for at least 72 hours. Um, and at least 80% of the crew members have to have previous fire experience. So moving on, what really is a hotshot crew, right? Um, Honestly, it's just day in and day out of being on the landscape and seeing fire, and living and working with 20 to 25 other people. So it's a lot of coffee and it's a lot of sleeping in the dirt, which is this kind of middle picture. That is where I spent most of my nights during that 6 months that we're going and traveling to assignments. Um, and yeah, I think that this is where I started to really be like, wow, the amount of knowledge that you're able to gain through sleeping, eating, living on the fire line is really incredible because there are so many things that I think you're able to pick up kind of even in your subconscious, just through your senses of being that close to fire and living in the environment so closely. So, yeah, and in terms of operations, a lot of what we're doing is building fire line. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, that's digging down to mineral soil, using chainsaws and hand tools. Um, and then sometimes if it's what's called an indirect fire line, we will then light a fire off of that line that we built, which will connect with the main fire. And so here's just some more pictures, hopefully to illustrate what we're doing. Another big thing with Hotshot Crews, because we're a national resource, is we will travel throughout the US. So even just in my 4 years, I've traveled to New Mexico, Arizona, Alaska. That's what that flight picture is from. Oklahoma, Oregon, Washington, Alabama, Florida, Georgia. Like the list goes on. And again, it was like so incredible to be able to also see how fire is acting in these different locations and these different fuel types and the different terrain. And it's sometimes hard to even, fully comprehend all of the things that you're seeing, but it will come up throughout even my day when I'm doing, my coursework or anything. And it's pretty incredible, all of the things that you're able to soak in. And so that kind of brings me to this idea of operational knowledge, right? So with the amount of time that we work, if you guys have talked to firefighters or maybe hotshots before, you hear this term of, oh, it's a 1,000 hour season. And what does that really mean, right? And so when we're working for this 6 months, we will like normally pick up 1,000 hours of overtime. And so that's on top of our base 40-hour weeks. And just a little quick math with that, if you multiply that by 25 people, that's 50,000 hours in just 6 months. And so the amounts of things that you can pick up on, I think just with that level of exposure to a phenomenon is really incredible. And working alongside people like my leadership who have been in this field for 10, 15, 20 years, it was so obvious to me that they were just like these experts of embodied knowledge about the fire environment and about operational tactics. And it was really breathtaking in a way. And then at the same time, I was learning so much about fire behavior just from seeing it myself. And it was really inspiring and great coming off of an undergrad and which was of course dominantly coursework based and then going into the field and seeing all these things um, really led me to a lot of what I'm doing now. And then just a final little point. So this is a bit from I keep intense journals throughout the time, and I think it really illustrates though what I'm trying to get at with that embodied knowledge and operational intelligence. And so this is from August in 2022, I believe. And so I said it was a hotshot 2 weeks from initial attack to incident management team, 14 days of hard, valuable, viable work that contributed to containing the least accessible and most problematic areas of the fire. So yeah, please bear with me about my spellings. But I think that first paragraph really gets at how beneficial it is for our knowledge building that we get to see fire from when it's an emerging incident all the way to when it is contained. And so you get to see the lifespan of fire behavior and how it's moving across the landscape. And then next I go on to say, I was present in a way I haven't accessed since childhood, quelled anxiety, yet charged awareness of self, emotions, environment, and overall acceptance and peace with the now. And so it was working in the field like this in such kind of like a charged environment really does require you to be present. And it enables you to really be paying attention and be learning from what you're seeing on the landscape. And then I say, yet the product of the work. I felt this forest wanted to burn more beyond our containment lines. Should it have? And then I include, here's my next journal entry, which is 4 days later after our R&R. And we're back at the same incident. Arrived yesterday afternoon, swing shift till midnight, burning, chucking bombs, shooting pistol, wild to see and manipulate fire at night. And so I feel like this just really illustrates how we're able to really observe and learn from the fire itself. And kind of the most effective operations are when we learn from what the fire is doing and respond to it rather than trying to, enforce our own like wants and needs on it. Um, and so then firing, right? This is one of our kind of bread and butters as a hotshot crew is our backfiring operations. Here's a video of my buddy. This is on a burn up in California, a night burn, which is one of the greatest, just to be able to see fire activity and fire behavior. Um, and So, yeah, backfiring is one of the main tactics that hotshot crews implement. And what I really love about this definition is that it says intentionally setting fire. And I think that those words hold a lot because you can't do something intentionally without a knowledge of it. And even though that knowledge is maybe built off of field experience and not book experience, it is still just as valid. And it can co-benefit that book experience and that research experience. And so that those experiences combined with this picture, which is illustrating, this was when my superintendent was on the phone trying to get us approved to do a backfiring operation that was just outside of a town. And it was getting delayed and we were so frustrated because we were like, here's the timing window that the weather is in alignment. It will be favorable for us. And he had to be sitting on the phone trying to get that approved when we just wanted to get to work, right? And so that kind of instilled in me this bigger question of like, what's going on? Why can't we be doing these operations in the way that we want to be doing them? Is this inhibiting its efficiency? It was just like so frustrating to feel as though we were being tied up because of this approval process when our decisions were really based on like spatial temporal timing that had to be in alignment with the environment. So that brought me to grad school. Um, and so my study is basically kind of looking at firing operations as a tactic, and looking at how firefighters and managers alike understand them. And I will say, as a disclaimer again, that I have shifted this perspective so much since being on the crew my first couple of years to where I am now. And I do think it is a bigger conversation than just the hotshot crews like getting held up in the red tape because I think that everyone's coming at it from a different perspective. But I think that understanding those perspectives and being able to align them better will only help our operations and our collaborative capacity. So basically, I mean, how many of you guys have read all those papers that like we need more fire on the landscape, there's a fuel debt. Um, and so we know that recent fire creates reduced subsequent fire effects if we're talking about fire intensity and severity, which then in turn increases operational intelligence. Um, but what we need is to start considering that firing operations in a suppression setting can also be used to manage fuel loading. A lot of the current research is just focused on prescribed fire or managed fire. And I think that that is a little bit to the disservice of suppression firing operations. Because even if you look at the agency administrator definition of suppression, it's just called a management action intended to extinguish a fire or alter its direction of spread. So it doesn't necessarily need to be this is going to be the smallest, footprint of fire. It can also be we're manipulating it in a way that is beneficial not only for protecting values at risk, but also for the ecology of the system. Um, and then decisions and actions are limited by socio-political contexts. And so a lot of the current research in wildfire is looking at the dynamics between managers and stakeholders. So, like private landowners wanting to do prescribed burns and stuff like that. But not a lot of it looks at the intra-agency dynamics, like what I'm talking about with the approval process from a crew to a division to an operation section chief to an agency administrator. And so I think better understanding that will also help us to make efficient decisions. And then wildfire science struggles to keep up with operational realities. So I guess this is my main soapbox, just that operational intelligence should be integrated into um, more like scientific literature, theoretical based knowledge, and that these two can co-benefit each other and they don't necessarily have to be disparate. But that when we really bring practitioner experience to the forefront, it will help to make sure that that science is grounded in application. Um, and so then the following research questions are what I came up with to kind of address these needs. And so my research is looking how do incident management personnel understand and conceptualize strategic firing operations throughout biophysical conditions. So that would be the landscape, the weather, the seasonality, socio-political contexts. So that would be different agencies, different lands owning, the where the fire is occurring, what have you. And then temporal confines. So when we're thinking about an incident in terms of the entire lifespan or in terms of just an operational shift and how that affects our decision making. And then what are facilitators, barriers, and decision-making processes that affect strategic firing operations? So that pretty much explains itself, but just looking into why are these things successful and how can we then make sure that we're promoting that. So my methodology, I'm doing a qualitative study to answer these questions. I'll be doing interviews with people throughout the chain of command of that decision-making and approval process for firing operation implementation. So that will be crew bosses, division supervisors, operation section chiefs, and agency administrators. And then additionally, aside from the interviews, I'll be doing participant observations, which is a qualitative method that is of the ethnographic background. And it's basically just, I'm still going to be working fire season this summer. And so I'll take some rigorous notes, memos, and photos, and use my Avenza to collect as much data as I can to kind of triangulate the data that I'm getting from interviews. Because those interviews will be conducted in the field during next fire season. And then coding is the ending analysis, and that is just looking for emerging themes from all of this qualitative data that I'll be collecting. So why am I doing that? Mainly fire is not the problem, right? Like it's more of how are we understanding fire? How are we allowing it to exist on the landscape? What are we comfortable with? What do we know about it? Um, and we need to have that approach in order to inform efficient, effective, and objective aligned operations. Um, so this will be a rigorous analysis of lived experience, and that will produce like translational, multidisciplinary knowledge that can inform not only firefighters, but also managers, and academics. Um, and Yeah, so this mixed qualitative methods where I'm doing interviews and participant observations, it really will create space for that operational intelligence to come alive and to be a part of the research and to be considered on the same level as anything else in the scholarly literature. And then firing operations, they do present an opportunity, right? I mean, ideally, we would be using prescribed fire and climate change mitigation and land use change for the ideal pathways to wildfire resiliency. But I think firing operations are an underutilized opportunity to still address that fuel debt, and achieve multiple objectives, not only for suppression, but also for wildfire resilience. Um, all right. So then that brings me to a hard shift of what else I'm doing in grad school. Though along the same line of the kind of promotion of operational knowledge, myself and another one of the graduate students in my lab, Mariah, who will be presenting next week, we started running a trip for undergraduate students where we during the spring break, we took them down to the southeast to participate in some prescribed burning field operations. And so this is a trip that is honestly very near and dear to me because in my first semester at grad school, I was feeling the itch to get back out in the field, and I definitely wanted some of the students to be able to experience what that's like and just how much you can learn even in 24 hours of being on a burn. And New York has some burning going on, but not in the same scale yet as the Southeast. So I was lucky enough that I made some good contacts because I attended the Prescribed Fire Training Center down in Florida. And so I reached out to them and we were able to line up a whole spring break trip where we were taking them down south. Um, so it really ended up being this great kind of professional experience for these undergrads where they were able to go and work alongside professionals in the field, see that maybe even though this person hasn't had a formal education, they don't have a bachelor's of science, that they are still very much an expert on their piece of land. They understand how to read fire behavior and they know the phenomena is going on because of this personal relationship that they've developed just through being in the field day in and day out. Um, and it was a really great opportunity too for students to apply learned concepts that they were introduced to during a fire class that my advisor teaches in the fall. But fire is such a hard thing to teach without actually seeing it. So it was just great to be able to walk with some of the students when we were burning, and they would be like, "Oh my gosh, it burns hotter in the sun." And I'm like, yeah, you saw it, right? And it's just those little moments were really incredible. So just quickly, just to touch on the logistics that were able to bring us there. We've run it for 2 years now. So last year we drove cross country down to Florida from New York. We had myself and Mariah running it as sort of pseudo squad bosses since both of us are firefighter ones. And then we had the 6 undergrads that we took get their certifications so that they were firefighter twos. We participated in 3 burns. We did a bunch of field tours and post-burn surveys. And we also visited the University of Georgia Fire Lab, which was awesome. We worked and were hosted by the Nature Conservancy on the Chattahoochee Fall Line. And then we also worked with their interagency burn team, which was the Georgia DNR. And it was so incredible. And then last year, or I'm sorry, this past year, just a few weeks ago, we went down and we flew. And this time we took a couple of additional students, and so that allowed us to split up into 2 separate crews. Um, one crew was located in Florida, hosted by Tall Timbers, and we were doing a bunch of private lands burning with them. And then another crew went back to where we were the year prior, at the TNC. And so, what does that actually look like? We would do briefings every day. I mean, I definitely injected this trip with a lot of what I learned as standard ops on the crew. So we would do daily briefings. We would go and do burns, and then we would do after action reviews, group meals, which was a really great way to kind of establish that crew culture and have everybody buy in. And yeah, I will say I was super stoked with how the students really stepped up to this. They would, be mopping the floor at night without me having to tell them, and they would make sure that I wouldn't have to tell them anything twice, which is what you always want to see, in a new firefighter. And so, yeah, here's just more pictures, right? We were burning in the longleaf, which was incredible. That's what's on the upper right. And then my crew from this past year are on the lower right. Definitely tried to get them to look a little bit like a hardcore crew. Although my sandals definitely betray that. And then, yeah, just them being able to have a torch in their hand or a tool in their hand was really so incredible. And then up on that left corner is when we got to visit the fire lab in Georgia, which was pretty great to see how they have a whole setup with an oven and stuff, and they're able to run fire experiments there. And so, yeah, some of the outcomes from this trip, were truly just seeing classroom concepts manifest in the field, and additionally career development. So from 2025, 2 of the students that we brought went on to careers as wildland firefighters. One was hired with the Forest Service, and another was hired with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they both cited our trip as a major influencing factor in those decisions. That not only helped them to know that they wanted to do this job, but it also helped them to get hired. So that was so rewarding to hear that. And then, um, sorry, this word bubble is just the answer to what aspect of the trip did you enjoy the most? And kind of bringing it back to my whole theme, I guess, of this talk, it's really people, right? People are the ones who hold the knowledge, and their ability to translate that knowledge and share it with others is, I think, what really brings us all together and what allows us to do effective work and have people get something out of the experience and also do what is good for the landscape. Um, so yeah, here are just some more student takeaways. So seeing how they used fire to manage larger landscapes for habitat and more was super useful to see used on the larger scale. Additionally, getting to see burns on bigger units made a lot of what I've learned in the fire ecology class and online really started to make a lot more sense and tie everything together. Um, Agency partners were awesome. So many cool people that were so passionate about what they do and more than willing to share that passion with us. Definitely rubbed off on me. I love this quote because one of the things that I think has kept me in this field is that people are really in it for the love of it and they will go out of their way to share what they know because they're just so excited and all they want to do is bring more people into the fold. Um, I think this trip is the most valuable thing offered at this school regarding fire. There is nothing you learn more from than actually getting boots on the ground and actively interacting with what you're learning about. Couldn't have said it better myself. Um, this trip contributed more to my fire experience than a semester-long course ever could. The hard and soft skills learned on this trip are tremendously important and have benefits outside of fire. So again, kind of what I've been talking about this whole time is like the amounts of things that you're able to learn and experience just by being there is just so incredible because of all of the things that you maybe take for granted that your senses are just consuming, your eyes, your ears, how it feels like with the weather and how then that is affecting fire behavior. And so even though you might not be formally integrating that as like, oh, this is what's happening here and here and here and here, it still is this form of embodied knowledge through rigorous practice and just exposure. So yeah, some final thoughts, bringing this to an end. Just I think a lot of kind of what I've done with co-leading this trip and my graduate research is based on some basic tenets, in fire when you're getting trained up, they always say, be a student of fire, be a student of fire. Um, and what that really means to me is just be a student of everything, but especially fire, because I think it's when we allow fire to tell us what it wants to do that we're really able to work with it instead of against it. And that's like what I was saying with that fire is not the problem. And so if you're a student, if you're listening and if you're responding to it, then you can make decisions that are mutually beneficial, instead of forcing your hand and fighting up against something. And then that brings me to don't fight fire, right? Ask of it what it wants to do, learn from it, and you can manipulate it, but you don't necessarily need to just be brute force doing what you think is going to happen because I feel like that is when your line gets jumped or anything like that. And it's a dynamic relationship, it's a give and take, and you have to be responding to how it is expressing itself on the landscape, which is ever changing. Um, and so then I'll just end with a big thanks to, of course, like my whole hotshot crew. I would not be where I am without them. I learned so much in such a short time, and I'll endlessly be inspired by all of those badass ladies and dudes. SUNY ESF, the Nature Conservancy for hosting us, Tall Timbers down in Florida, and the American Wildfire Experience too. They gave me a scholarship that definitely helped out. And if any of you guys are interested more in firefighter experiences, I would definitely check out the American Wildfire Experience. Um, yeah, and that brings me to the end. So if anybody has questions, I'm happy to take them.
All right, thank you very much, Anna. Very enlightening talk. Really enjoyed that. And as Anna said, if anyone has any questions for her, please go ahead and put those in the chat. While we're waiting for some questions to come in, I've got a couple of things for you, Anna. And I I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation simply because I come from an operational background and you and I have kind of talked about that. And so a lot of my learning was from the operational world, helping to understand the theoretical world or the educational part. But let me start with a question first. So, where's the Helitech crew that you're going to be working on in 2026?
It's on the same forest that I've been on with my hotshot crew, so I'll just be next door.
Okay, gotcha. All
Yeah.
right. And then, so I was trying to write some notes on how I wanted to ask you this next question. And then your slide towards the end actually was perfect from one of the students on your Southeast trip, where they made, in quote, see classroom concepts manifest in the field. And
Mhm.
I saw, the journaling that you did when you were a hotshot. So do you have an example of a classroom concept that manifested itself when you were in the field, whether it was in the Southeast or you are on a hotshot cruise, something that like, wow, now I get it.
Yeah, I would say maybe maybe this isn't a classroom concept, but um one of the things that one of my captains used to tell us is your so when we're talking about ignitions, right? Strategic ignitions, um, in the classroom, you're taught different firing patterns. And so that could be, I'm going to place a dot here, and then a little further down, I'm going to place another dot here of fuel that, becomes fire. And they talk about lag times, like how much spacing should I have, and um, how much spacing should I also have between lighters and everything like this. And in a classroom setting, it can be very prescriptive of like, if we're in this fuel type, we should be doing this. And if it's this weather, we should be doing this. And then of course you get out in the field and how is it ever going to be that perfect, right?
Mhm.
And so what my captain would say to us is, for lag time, I want you to have the fire tell you, So watch the intensity of the flame length, watch the rate of spread of the flames, and then use that to tell you how much fuel and fire you want to put on the ground and where. Because you could have to be making these micro adjustments just from walking across a burn unit because the fuel or the vegetation below you could be changing. Just 5 feet down the line. And additionally, the lighting, like some parts could be shaded and some parts could be unshaded. And so being able to share that concept with students, I think was a big turning point in their understanding of this stuff. Because I think conceptually, when we get into these boxes of like, if A, then B, then once you get out into the field, it can actually be really restrictive of your ability to implement those concepts. And so once you kind of release that prescriptive way of seeing it, and you're just like, no, these are just like the guiding concepts and they're there for a reason and you can use them for your understanding of why this is going on, but then allowing them to adjust to what you're seeing on the landscape, is where those things kind of really co-benefit each other.
Excellent. Yeah, and I mentioned with my operational background. So for those of you on the talk today, so I was a meteorologist with the National Weather Service prior to working with NAVC, and I was also an incident meteorologist, going out predicting weather and briefing crews on large wildfires across the country. And my IMET experiences as an incident meteorologist, what I learned out in the field, I was able to take back to our local office, and it completely changed the way I briefed the other meteorologists in the office, the way I briefed local officials, state officials, federal officials, the data that I looked at by having those operational experiences. Even though I was going back to an operational world, but it was just taking those concepts and then same thing theoretically seeing um, a plume dominated fire. By actually seeing it, I understood the theoretical aspects of it more versus, everything that I had read about, but to actually see it in the field can just really help. And I love how you're taking all your operational experiences and taking them back towards your master's program. That's a great way of doing it. Is there, I was just kind of looking if there's anyone have any other questions for Anna, feel free to pop those into the chat. Otherwise, she and I might start talking about fire assignments. Oh, here we go. Okay. So let's see here from Audrey. Thanks, Anna. Great presentation. Your passion is infectious. In your experience, have you heard of similar chain of command communication issues in prescribed fires in the Southeast that you've experienced on Western wildfire lines?
Hmm. That's a really good question. I think that what that makes me think of is kind of the different avenues of approval for prescribed fire. And I think what happens with these compounding factors is prescribed fire is um, you have kind of more agency in choosing when you are doing a prescribed burn operation. And so the approval is much more, I guess, like coordinated, and it's like we're here to set fire to the landscape intentionally. We have all these things in line, and the buy-in is kind of set up prior to the need to actually enact that prescribed fire operation. Whereas when you're in the wildfire setting, it's all emerging and it's all like this is the first time we're, engaging and making these decisions. And so I would think that that's kind of why those decision-making pathways are a little bit different when you're looking at a prescribed fire setting versus an incident management setting. And then you throw on top of that the liability piece of, this fire is burning on land that wasn't necessarily predetermined as a place that we want to do a burn. And so it's like, can we? Is the landowner on board with that? And it just creates a just much more complex environment to be making that decision in and asking for that approval within.
Okay. I hope that answers your question, Audrey. Are there any more questions out there? Otherwise, I've got a couple of other announcements before we close. Oh, here we go. This one from Jade. Do you envision the undergrad program continuing after you and Mariah graduate?
That's a great question. So I guess one of the things I didn't talk about was the first year that we did it, we had it be like a 1 credit course. And then this past year, we ran it through the Student Association of Fire Ecology Club. And part of that decision was so that we could start to pass the baton on, so to speak, to the club members, so that they could continue running it. And we're actively trying to kind of bolster them to be able to do that. And I think that going these past 2 years, and establishing the relationships year after year with our host units is definitely going to benefit the continuation of it, even if it's only run by undergrads. Although I will say, I think that having kind of the oversight of someone who's a little bit more experienced and credentialed definitely helps just from like an operational efficiency and safety point of view. But along the lines of that, I am still like I will be working in operations, and I think that my hosts unit is going to be supportive of still sending me, so that I'll come even when I'm done with grad school, because it really is a priority for me to continue being a part of it, because even just aside from how rewarding it is, I think for the students it's also really rewarding for me because I'll learn something new every time, and it also helps to revive kind of my cynical soul that might happen during fire season.
Okay, great. Um, all right. Last question here from Katie. And uh, based on your experiences, how do you think lawmakers can better assist uh, firefighters, whether you're in or out of fire season? If there's any kind of general comments on that.
Yeah, I would say a major thing is including firefighters in the decision making of like the law kind of elements of things. I guess one of the examples, I guess this isn't really a law, but one of the examples that I can think of is the whole idea of like having wildland firefighters wear respirators. And it's like, okay, this is a great idea, but it's pretty clear to me that it came from someone who hasn't had to hike in like and go up, 1,200 feet of gain in a half of a mile and then be sucking in smoke for 12 hours. Like a respirator would make that worse. And
Mm.
so then that's where we need to start including people who have these experiences in these discussions of what is appropriate. Because then it's like, okay, how do we shift that to just give us presumptive coverage or make sure that we're having more checkups throughout the year? And I think a similar kind of concept could apply to the law of like, okay, this is a great idea, but let's actually have ways to evaluate how it's operating in action.
Excellent. Nope, that's a great example. Thanks. So we've got one more, and then we'll put some closure on this. So from Genevieve says, thanks for the presentation, Anna. As someone mainly exposed to long-term wildfire risk modeling and computational fire modeling, it's great to hear more from the operational side. From where I am, the modeling and operational sides of fire feel very separate. What do you feel are some areas that wildfire modeling and operational experts need more exchange on?
Okay, modeling and operational risk. I think that a big Hmm. The thing that comes forefront of mine is something that came up in one of my interviews, which is the idea of when we're talking about firing operations as a tactic, and we're talking about the risk management process of that, we're saying, do we expose people to a higher risk situation, but for a shorter amount of time, which would be going direct on fire's edge and digging line? Or do we lengthen that time of exposure but slightly reduce the risk, which would be going indirect and then doing a firing operation? And so the way that I guess, kind of made sense of that also was okay, but if we're going direct constantly, and then the fire is jumping our line, we're still going to be exposed on this longer term scale. But we're kind of thinking of it in a little bit more of like a short-sighted context. I mean, there's definitely appropriate circumstances to go for the Hail Mary, but it's not always. So in terms of like the long-term risk modeling, I would say really being able to understand like that temporal element of things would be really helpful. And obviously, that's a huge difficulty and a huge chore. But even the idea that like the beyond just the lifespan of the incident, um, us maybe doing an indirect operation in 2022 on this piece of ground could reduce our risk if we're on that same piece of ground 2 years later, because there's no longer going to be an overaccumulation of fuels. So I think having the risk modeling also not necessarily operate in this tunnel vision of just the incident that you're on, but on how it will affect the lifespan also of the landscape. I think that could also be a cool thing to look at.
Excellent. Thank you. I hope that helps, Genevieve. Okay, let me if Anna, if you wouldn't mind to stop sharing, and then I'm gonna
Yeah.
go ahead. I've got just a couple more quick announcements. Or
Okay.
we
Okay. Do that. Go through.
okay, I'll go ahead and let's see here. All right. So thank you again, Anna. We still have two more talks coming up in our student webinar series for the spring 2026. As Anna mentioned, next up, next Thursday is Mariah Loughran from SUNY ESF. She'll be talking about fire effects on hydrology and forest soils in the Northeast United States. And then the following week April 23rd, we finish up with Aaron Arnecki, who I saw was on the call today from the University of Bremen in Germany. And he'll be talking about Spot Across the Pond, wildland firefighting in Germany and Europe, as well as kind of similar to Anna, some of his work that he's doing for his master's. And he's also involved in the International Association of Wildland Fires mentoring program. So he'll share a little bit about those experiences as well. And just kind of want to mention if you or somebody else you know would love to share a project in this format, you can either reach out to me there, Eric Evanson at nafchelp@gmail.com. And if you want to learn more about the two upcoming talks, you can either hit the QR code or go to firesciencenorthatlantic.org and sign up for those last two sessions. Lastly, when you close your browser, there's a very brief anonymous survey that will pop up. Takes less than a minute. If you could help us out by filling that out, we'd greatly appreciate that. Otherwise, I just want to thank you very much, Anna, again for your informative talk today. And I want to thank everybody else who stuck around for the talk as well. It was greatly appreciated for everybody, and I hope you learned as much as I did. And we're going to go ahead and keep this meeting open for just another minute in case there's any sort of last minute question that you might have. Otherwise, thank you again, everybody, for attending, and have a great day.